God, amen. Lord, make us ready to pray with all thanksgiving. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, lest we want in Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. So, I'm looking at the question sheet, and I you guys are really want to talk about sex. I'm just gonna say it. So for those of you who weren't at this last week, we actually did address a lot of the more sexy questions. But for those of you who weren't there or you want to go over them again, maybe when I come back from California, hopefully by then we'll be in person. We can talk about it again. Like, I'm not going to get annoyed if we talk about it a bunch of times, but just because I don't want to go over everything that we did last week all over again, I might not readdress them. So last week we talked about sex, why not sex before marriage, same-sex attraction, and things like that. Having said that, there's at least a few of you that wrote questions about dealing with feelings towards the same sex. And so if you're feeling it yourself and you need to talk it out, feel free to like holler either at any one of the abunas. There's now 4 of us in town, and your servants, whoever you feel comfortable with. Feel free to, because probably you're going to want some support and like someone to be able to talk to about it. And I know from the few interactions that I've had here, it doesn't seem to me like anybody here is planning on judging you. Those of you willing to put on your cameras, that would be great. Because right now it's me and your servants, which is nice. They're really friendly. But other people would be nice. Okay. I am going to start with maybe some of the lighter questions and then go into the heavier ones. But here's one. If God tells us to love everybody, why do we hate Satan and Arius? To be honest with you, I don't know that I actually do hate Satan or Arius personally. And I don't know that we're called to that. So the deepest meaning of the word love and hate, or I shouldn't say the deepest, the original meanings of those, hi Rebecca, you came and gone. But the deepest meaning of those were things that you choose is the thing that you love, and the thing that you don't choose is the thing that you don't love, because love was seen as a common will, right? That's why, for example, in the Old Testament, you'll hear God himself say, Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated, right? He doesn't mean hate the way that we talk about hate today. Today, when we say hate, we mean I don't like that person, I despise that person, I have bad feelings towards that person, but hate didn't necessarily mean that. So if by hating Satan, you mean not choosing Satan, not having the same will as Satan, then yeah, you need to hate him. But in terms of despising something, to be honest with you, I don't think that even God despises them. They're his kids, right? Even Lucifer is his own creation, right? So in terms of despising someone, no, God doesn't. In terms of not choosing that person, then we mean it in that sense. But that's a good question. Is it okay to convert to Islam? Sure, if you want to. Yeah, I know this messing. But if you're going to convert to Islam, which you're allowed to do, it's legal, and you have a free will and you have your own body and your own mind. I just hope that if you were to do something like that, I know that whoever wrote it is probably joking, but if you're planning to, do your homework, right? If you're going to reject something as false, like Christianity, it's like Christianity is false and so I'm going to join Islam, then do your research as to why Christianity is false and Islam is true. And make sure you do your homework into inquiring whether or not Islam is itself true. And if you believe that the fullness of truth is in Islam, all power to you. But I would just encourage you to make sure that you're not just, doing it for a wrong reason, but you're actually seeking the truth, right? That's the most important thing, is that you're seeking the truth. Is it okay for Christians to write checks? Go for it. If you have a checking account and you have a checkbook, you want to buy something, you can afford it, by all means, go for it. You can write checks. I don't know if this was a joke or if there was something behind it, because I'm going to turn it into something useful, if that's okay with you, even if you're joking. In the Old Testament, Jews were ordered not to charge interest on fellow Jews. I don't know if you know that. So when you wrote this question, whoever wrote this question about writing checks, it made me think of that, because writing the checks is okay, but we should be thinking about how we handle money as Christians. So in that respect, you should think about how to use your money justly, how to use your money fairly, how to use your money to benefit other people, not just yourself. But as for writing checks, if God gives us feelings of lust, why does he expect us to just ignore it? We should act on it. Honestly, you guys are awesome. So God doesn't give you thoughts of lust, okay? God doesn't give you something that's intrinsically wrong, okay? Lust itself is actually, we tend to use the word lust only to mean the negative, to mean negative wanting, okay? But lust technically is just referring to desire. So when we talk about lust, we're talking about wrong desire. We're not talking about desire itself. So you're right in identifying that we have natural desires, okay? So it's not wrong for you to have desire. It's not wrong for you to sexually want to be gratified. Actually, that's not itself a sin. Lust is referring to a disordered desire, okay, when it's not the right amount. So saying that because I have desire, I should just act on it because I have it, is not a really, if you think it through, I know why it sounds logical when you ask it, but if you think it through, the question might not be as logical as you think, right? So I always use this example only because I remember these friends of ours, we had these Lebanese friends that used to come over when we were kids, and I don't mean Dido, but this girl took gum and we all encouraged her to put it up her nose. And she did. And she went to the hospital to have it removed. And the reason why I'm using that as an example is that to say just because I have this desire means I should act on it doesn't actually make a lot of sense, because your nose can fit gum in it. So you can't say just because my nose is created in a way in which it can fit gum, therefore I should put gum. Those don't really logically follow from one another, okay? So the real question should be, why do I have a nose? And why is there a hole in it? As opposed to saying, if I can use it like this, it must be this, right? So yes, you have desire. And so the question is, what is my desire for? And if you actually question what is the desire for, you'll understand that actually God wants you to have pleasure. So when you take the rest of your question and say, why does he expect us to ignore it? Actually, that's not entirely right. He doesn't expect you to ignore it. He expects you to use it the right way. That's why, if you want to take this even further, since all we want to talk about apparently is sex, that's why St. Paul says, within marriage, don't deny each other sexuality. You have to agree about it, right? So actually the Bible's saying the opposite, is saying, no, if one of you needs to gratify your desire for the other, you should gratify it. And if you're going to not, you need to discuss it first and not just deny each other that expression of your desire. So desire itself is not wrong. We're talking about using desire in a wrong way, right? So for example, you whoever wrote the question brought it to lust, to talking about sexuality. But what about if you had a desire for social justice? That's a good desire. But what if you used your desire for social justice to shoot someone down because you think that they were mean. You've now used your desire in a wrong way. And so it's not about just how can I use it? It's, is there a right way of using it? So it's a really good question. But just whenever you think of these questions, because these are good questions, think about, don't assume that what you think is the right thing. And I don't mean that as an attack at all, because I have the same issue myself. Instead, think back and step back and say, okay, I've assumed this. So like in this question, you've assumed that desire is always wrong, that sexuality is always wrong, and that God wants us to always ignore it. And those assumptions were all wrong. So these are good for these questions to come out and find out, what does the right meaning come from? Why does Mama say, I have to cover my shoulders? I would ask Mama why she thinks that you should cover your shoulders, because I'm not really sure why you specifically were told to cover your shoulders. But if we take this question more generally, because your questions are actually hilarious. If you take the question more generally, I'm assuming that maybe your mom said, "Inti dakhli knisah Ariana, عيب يا ماما, عيب يا بنتي, إزاي تخشي الكنيسة كده?" Then that's a whole other question, okay? And I will tie this question to another question that was written of, if God created Adam and Eve naked, then why should we wear clothes? Because these two things are probably related. So if we were perfect, and I wish we were, actually, you could go to church naked, because none of us would be lusting after one another. Right? That's why whoever wrote the question about God made us naked, yeah, you're right. Before we started warping things, before we started using things in the wrong way, we were okay to be naked. And actually, I'll tell you a story, you might have heard it before. There's a famous story from the Desert Fathers. So these are about monks, right? So monks, more than anybody, are trying to keep themselves like from seeing things, because they took vows not to get married. So there's a story of an old monk who had to go to Alexandria with a couple of younger monks to get something done. And they got to Alexandria, and there was some lady parading around the city on a horse, completely naked, making a total spectacle of herself. So most of the monks put their heads down to not look. And this one monk is just like smiling and staring. And they're all like, what is wrong with Abuna? How is he staring her down? And they went and asked Abuna, they said, Abuna, why is it that you didn't turn away? You were staring at her. And he said, my brothers, I was marveling at the beauty of God's creation. And the thing is, and you can laugh, and I know that you guys will say, oh, okay, from now on, I'm just marveling at God's creation, but me and you are probably not there yet. But this monk really meant it, right? This monk had actually reached a state of purity where he could see this nakedness and not be affected, right? Which is amazing. I'm not there yet, that's for sure, okay? So that's why we clothe ourselves, is because actually we don't have, all of us, that purity of heart to be able to see it. So then there becomes a question of, well, then how come I need to wear my clothes in a particular way when the problem is with somebody else, right? Because you could say, well, now you're making me have to like اختشي بنت, right? Or يا ولد, for the sake of somebody else, and that might not feel completely fair. And on some level, I'll probably agree with you, right? On some level, you're right. It's not completely fair, but that's what comes with community, right? Is that I should think about how I affect other people. It's a respect thing when we live with other people. So, for example, let's say one of your friends is got buck teeth, and you actually think that her buck teeth or his buck teeth are actually really cool, even though they come out like chipmunks, okay? So you don't think it's a big deal because you don't think it's ugly, you don't think there's anything wrong with it. But what if your friend who has the buck teeth is really self-conscious about it and you keep joking about it? Can you say, it's not my fault that my friend is hypersensitive, I should joke about whatever I want to, especially because I'm not thinking anything wrong? Or would you, out of respect for your friend, say, I won't joke about it, even though I never even meant anything wrong about it, right? Even though I might even think that they're beautiful buck teeth, right? Is that we have to be thinking about one another. So when we're coming into a community to pray, can we like agree for a second that we're all human beings with hormones, including myself? So if you walk into a building and everyone's half naked and you're struggling with your lust, as somebody else wrote in the question, so clearly among you is already listed in these questions that you guys have lust, and sometimes even towards the same sex. So now we're talking about coming into a building where we are real human beings who really do have lust. It's not theoretical, it's not hypothetical. We actually all have it, okay? And if we come in dressed in a way that we feel is beautiful, but makes other people struggle, shouldn't we think about that? And so now I don't even just mean you young women and saying, okay, come in and you guys need to dress up. I'm also talking about the men who are wearing muscle shirts, who are like taking off their t-shirts in the parking lot, or rather playing basketball while the girls are around, or I'm sorry, even around some of the guys now, right, who might be struggling with attraction towards the same sex. You should think about it, right? I'm not saying that every single thing you do has to be controlled by everyone else, okay? But what I am saying is that there are cultural standards that we do know, right? Whether Egyptian or Canadian, even Canadians have cultural standards, right? There's a reason why when you go to an interview, you're supposed to dress a particular way, right? It's not just church. There's a reason why when you go up to work, you have to dress a particular way. It's not just church. Is that there really are cultural standards that we've got to be careful about of how we affect people. So guys and girls, please be careful. And you know what? I got to tell you, because I'm just going to be vulnerable with you. I'm a celibate priest, right? I'm a celibate priest. So don't just think about your brothers and sisters. Think about people like me, right? I'm trying to keep my purity in a world that's really gung-ho hardcore sex, right? And here I am trying to keep my purity as well in a culture that's really anti-purity. So think about people around you, even people like me, and say, you know what, let's make it easier for each other by just making decisions that are easy on everybody. And you know what? Let's say you want to dress in a particular way because you think there's nothing wrong with it. And I'm actually not even being sarcastic right now. And you can do that in your room. You can do that in a place that really doesn't affect people. And it's actually itself not wrong. Go for it. And I recognize that every culture has a different standard, right? If you're in like rural, like certain areas of Africa where it's normal for women to go around topless, no one's going to think anything about you going around topless there. That's the normal there. But it's definitely not the normal here yet. It might be one day, right? And so that's why I'm just saying there are cultural aspects to this. I get it. But let's take a way of looking at how much we care for each other, right? And it's not just about clothing, it's about everything. It's about being sensitive to others and saying, I care about my brothers and sisters' needs as much as I care about my own. If you're in a place where you're like that monk, where you can look at that naked person and not be affected, good for you. Like for real, good for you. I applaud you, and may God preserve that grace in you. But it's a grace, and it's something that most of us actually don't have. And so feel for the rest of us have. Okay. Feel free to shoot follow-up questions if you need. Because I don't know if I answered the question. Actually, I want to say something to the guys here too, because I think a lot of the times girls hear this the most, right? Usually it's the girls that are being yelled at for their clothing, which is not really fair. I was on a retreat before I was ordained with my church, and I gotta say, because I'm a guy and I don't really think much about how girls think, because I'm like that. there is this guy, we were at this, like, it was like a college dorm that we were staying in for a residence. And some guy not from the retreat just walked in from the beach, and he was shirtless. He had a six pack. And obviously, because for me, I'm not having any feelings of attraction or even really noticing the guy. But I saw this girl freak out, right? She started like gasping and being like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, and like screaming and squealing. And she didn't even realize that she had reacted that way in front of everybody. And then when she did, she was really embarrassed. But the reason why I'm saying that story is I didn't realize how much girls, because I'm not a girl, I didn't realize that girls are affected that much. I know that guys can be affected that much when a hot girl comes in. But I really didn't know that girls are affected that way too. So guys, I would also say be careful, right? Don't wear clothing. I know it's like for guys, sometimes we want to like show off our progress at the gym, right? And we want our biceps to show or our six pack to show. And we're wearing shirts that as once we start stretching, right, start showing your six pack. I'm gonna tell you, I like when I was actually fit and I did have a six pack for a little bit, a very short period. When I started going to the gym, I was constantly at church feeling myself, right? And going for it. It just happens naturally, but we've got to realize that that can affect other people too. So it's not just the girls to be careful. Guys, be aware of it too. Don't wear the stuff that's going to show how jacked you are. By all means, take your selfies in the gym, the locker room. Like, I don't really care, but just be careful how you're affecting other people. Why do priests wear black? Honestly, it's more of a cultural thing. We've given it a religious meaning over time that we're dead to the world, et cetera, but actually Ethiopian priests wear white. Um, and so it's a cultural thing. People used to wear galabeyas in general, and men in general used to grow beards. And so that's actually where it originally came from. Over time, we gave it like different meditations. So what we wear and all that kind of stuff, that might even change over time, actually. So we will see. Why do girls wear a hijab in church? I haven't met any girl. I'm sorry, I haven't met any girl wearing a hijab yet. But your point is duly made. I understand what you're trying to say. Actually, if you don't want to wear the ishar, I mean, no one's gonna force you. Like, I don't think there's an ishar police at your church. Maybe there is, but I haven't seen like the ishar enforcers at church in a long time. But I just want you to know where it actually came from, because it did originally have a cultural basis. And just because something has a cultural basis, I'm not going to argue that that necessarily means that you should throw it out. Okay. But what used to happen is that a woman wore a veil. It was a symbol of belonging to her house. Okay. So it was actually a symbol of respect, modesty, and honesty. And so because a woman belonged to the house, and I'm not saying that that's how we think today, I'm just saying that's what it meant. Church was an extension, the public was the extension. Actually, women wore the isharb, the veil, not the hijab. The woman wore the veil everywhere. Okay. And that's actually why St. Paul said it. Because St. Paul was using the culture of his time. So for example, just so you understand, because he wasn't saying it as dogma. Let's say today, you guys started a movement, and forgive me, I'm going to sound illit adab right now, but let's say you guys started a movement of wearing your underwear to church and said, what's the problem? Is it the underwear that makes me holy or not holy? Can you deny me communion because I'm wearing my underwear? So Mina might rightfully, if this became a thing, he might rightfully make a qanun al-burshaya that whoever is wearing just their underwear for communion can't have communion. because we culturally understand that it's really not mahtaram to go out in public just in your underwear or in your bathing suit. You can go to a beach in your bathing suit, but you don't typically go to church or to work or to school in your bathing suit, right? So St. Paul was using the culture of his time to say, culture does matter. Don't go out of your way to go against culture, because it means you're going out of your way to show disrespect. So the veil in its time was a very big symbol of respect, right? So did it have a cultural origin? Yes, it did. I don't deny that, okay? But then the question becomes, if it isn't something that has anything to do with your meaning as a woman, right? If it's not saying, this is a sign of your slavery in the church, I would understand why you want to rip it off and walk away. No problem, I get it. But if it's not, then ask why you care so much to not wear it. Okay? Because if you have no good reason, and it's just a nice symbol now, let's say it's just become a symbol. Culturally, we don't wear veils in public anymore in North America, but actually in Europe and in Africa and a lot of places they do, right? Until like recently, whether in Egypt or the streets of the Ukraine, you would see most women wearing that, not just like only in church, they'd be wearing it everywhere. Then ask why not. To be honest with you, what I wish we would do, I actually wish we would do what the Ethiopians and the Eritreans do. I love that they all wear the same thing at church. Everybody wears white, right? Everybody does that. And then we wouldn't feel this sense of, oh, they're doing this because I'm a woman, because it's not about your gender so much anymore. I really appreciate this question. I really, really do. And it is different from a hijab, even though it might have had the same origins, to be honest with you. It might have had the same origins, but used in a different way over history. But today it's more of a sign of respect. And if you're really, really struggling with it, feel free to talk to your spiritual guide about it, because no one's gonna force you if you feel really strongly about it. But I really want you to know that it's not about inequality. It's not about your value. It's not a symbol of slavery. It's not a symbol of demeaning. It's not a symbol of subjugation. It is not any of those things. It was one of the ways that women in particular were able to show respect. And so if you view it in that way, you might view it more positively, of saying, here's a way where me with my gender can show a particular way of respect that another person can't. And actually, just so you know, some of us men in our prayer rooms do cover our heads. I do personally, sometimes when I'm praying, if it's not too hot for me, because it is a nice way of showing humility. So it's not about gender anymore, but that's where I was going with it. Let's find the next one. When will the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches reunite? I don't know. I really hope in our lifetime. We have our differences, of course, but the synod of our church, we signed the agreements that we believe that what they're saying is orthodox. They signed it as well. So whether it'll happen soon or not, honestly, I don't know. The problem with us in history is that we all have a big ego. So may God give us humility. This one we answered last week. Can girls give communion? No, they can't, but neither can guys. Right? No one can give communion other than somebody who's ordained, specifically ordained. So it's not just that a male can give communion. It's specifically only somebody in the order of priesthood can give communion. And deacons are the lowest ranking of priesthood. Deacons are actually entered into the priesthood. That's why deacons are permitted to give communion. And today they mostly give the blood, but actually in the past, deacons gave the body and the blood. And so, for example, let's say Abuna has work to do after liturgy, he would be able to send a full deacon with the body and the blood to the hospital, both, not just the blood. Over time, that's changed for various reasons, and it could change again. But it's not about gender; it's about priesthood, right? It's a different thing. So, can girls communion? No, they cannot. Why does every single time I go to someone's house, they ask us to drink tea? That's a great question. But today they'll probably offer you coffee as well. I have coffee right now. But actually, there's a funny story because my priest growing up in Ontario, they offered him tea when he visited someone's house. It was Earl Grey. And the priest, when he visited, he's like, oh, this is very good. And he didn't like Earl Grey that much, but he was being polite. And he goes, and then they bought me like 20 boxes of Earl Grey. He goes, do you want to take them home? So yeah, Shay is a thing, man. But it was a big thing in London too. I have a question here from the chat saying, what are your thoughts of the Catholic popes about what the Catholic Pope said and confirmed that LGBTQ people can be in churches and can take communion? So there's two things that he said and didn't say, because the media, as usual, you got to be very careful with the media, because the media will often try and make people sound like they're saying something that they're not necessarily. So Pope Francis, they were accusing him of saying that he's okay with gay civil marriage. But if you actually read what he said in its entirety, he's not saying he thinks it's good. What he was asked about was whether or not it was okay for homosexuals to have civil rights. And he said, fine, give them civil union, but don't call it marriage. But he was not actually calling it a good thing. But as for a homosexual who is in the church and struggling with it, somebody who's not living a gay lifestyle by having sex and, like doing the whole scene, yes, we as Coptic Orthodox also say that they should be able to have communion. My bishop in our clergy meeting yelled at us for the same thing, right? And so just like if there's a heterosexual person who starts hooking up and living with somebody and they're not married, they might not have communion. The same thing for homosexuals, the same whether hetero or homosexual. We don't differentiate. And we're not mad at somebody because they have lust. So as long as somebody is struggling, we don't tell them that they can't have communion. So we agree with Pope Francis actually on that point. The head cover worn by monks, is it for humility as well? Actually, part of it is humility. Part of it is because of the symbols of the crosses on it, right? And the symbols of the stitching. But yes, one of the reasons that the monks wear the head cover is an act of humility, because we review our head as God, right? And the head in the family is the spouse, is the bridegroom. And so Christ as the bridegroom is the groom. And so that's why the monk takes on that woman's role, as weird as it sounds to say that, we're married to Christ directly. And so in that relationship, yes, we do cover the head as well. Which is why it's if you can see beyond the gender issue and just see the beauty of the meaning, you might actually come to like it. That's a great follow-up question. Thank you. Is obesity a sin? Yeah, actually it is. I don't remember. I think we might have answered that one last week. I don't remember, but yeah, it is. We did. Okay, thanks, Uncle. So I will skip it, but it is in the same way that smoking is. How do you make deals with the devil? Very simply, I'm not going to teach you how to do it, but if what you mean is like, what does it mean, like, for people to make deals? There are people who write contracts. I'll actually tell you a story about my brother in the St. Paul Brotherhood in California. He was telling me, this was just a couple of years ago, that there was a woman in the church that he was helping out at that asked him to try and talk to her son because she was worried that he was possessed. And the son was diagnosed with mental illness too. So he did also have mental illness. And so sometimes it's hard to tell the line whether somebody is or isn't. Anyways, the mom talked to him and Abuna said, you know what, maybe he's mentally ill. And she's like, well, he is, but there's some behaviors that seem extra bad. So he like followed up, did whatever. But then there was one time where she called Abuna, panicked, and said, Abuna, my son today, it was Holy Thursday from Holy Week. My son came to church. I forced him to come to church. I saw him get in line for communion, so I was very happy. But once we got out of church, he started laughing in a crazy way and told me, you think I had communion? I took the body and the blood and I kept it in my mouth. And when I got out of church, I spit it on the ground and I stamped all over it. So Abuna went to visit. And when Abuna went to visit, I'm not going to get into the details because there was some supernatural stuff happening in the house that was scary for some people. But he asked the kid directly, just like, did you make a deal with the devil? And he was like, yes. And he said, how? He goes, I wrote it. So he goes, show it to me. So he pulls out the contract that he wrote. And it was written so beautifully, actually. It was written very poetically. And Abuna said, where did you get these words from? And he goes, the devil gave them to me. He told me what to write, and I wrote it, and I signed it. So sometimes it's by writing a contract. Sometimes it's by going to a medium and making a contract. I'm aware of some cases where somebody just said it out loud to the devil. When you do things like Ouija boards, you're actively inviting. So it's not a deal, but you're inviting, you're giving authority. So there are lots of ways, and I would just say take it very seriously because it's not a joke and it's very scary. And there are all sorts of stories where people would do things like Ouija. Ouija is one of the #1 things in North America for entry into problems at the home, where the devil just doesn't go away. Somebody wrote to me in the chat, why can't girls become deaconesses too? Where in the Bible does it say they can't? Many women in the Old Testament and New Testament were. So actually, we did bring this up last week. We do have deaconesses in the church as an ordained rank. And Pope Shenouda ordained a bunch of women as full deaconesses. I'm not talking about mukarrasat, all right? I'm not talking about dedicated or consecrated sisters. I'm talking about specifically the order of the church called deaconess. It does exist in our own church, and we do have them. In the LA diocese, our bishop also, if you're talking about dressing in white like the boys do, our bishop does allow that, and they stand at the front and they sing if they want to. So that is allowed in some churches. You need to find out within your church and with your bishop what his thoughts are on that. But nobody's saying you're not allowed. And just like there are rules about who can become a deacon, there are rules about who can become a deaconess. So that's a cool thing. Like I said last week, I really hope maybe either while I'm gone or maybe when I come back, if we can invite Donna. Sorry. Sorry. It might have been a mistake, or is that on purpose? But I'm hoping we can get Donna on. She actually took a lot of pictures with that deaconess. She is a woman unlike me. So it'd be great, again, if we can get her to give a talk about the role of women in the church, and that you guys, especially the girls, can vent out some of your frustrations and your questions would be great. Because I know it can be frustrating. I don't know what it feels like because I'm not one, but as an outsider, I know that sometimes things seem unfair. Someone's asking what the full girl deacons did. So a deaconess, for example, in the early church, the way that Maroon worked wasn't like today where you just do the sign of the cross in different spaces. Actually, the Maroon, you were like to the Abiha, right? You would be completely covered from top to bottom, and you'd come out of the bath naked, and the priest would cover you with Maroon. But obviously, it was considered very inappropriate for a man to be covering a woman naked with oil, right? So actually, believe it or not, The woman had a role in the baptism, and the woman actually had a role in chrismating, in handling those things, which is a really big deal. And so that's one of the reasons why it came out of favor, is that when we evolved different practices, and there is no longer necessarily a need for certain roles, even for men, not just for women, for both, roles diminished, right? That's why you don't see that many full deacons in the church. There's been a recent popularity in bringing it back, but for decades and decades, people had no idea what a full deacon was, right? Because we just stopped using them. It wasn't just the deaconess. Good questions.
Abuna, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so remember when you were talking about the deals with the devil thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, how is that even possible? Isn't ours like, wait, can we sell our soul to the devil? Like, is it possible?
Yeah.
Wait, but isn't our soul God's? Like,
It's
isn't
supposed to
it?
be.
Yeah, then how can you sell your soul to the devil if it's not yours?
That's why it's so scary, because when we seal you with the Maroon, we're marking you as gods. Okay? When you're not sealed with the Holy Spirit, you're no man's land. That's why a Christian can't easily get possessed. But if a Christian says, I choose you, Satan, he's giving the devil his soul. So it's actually about you saying, I'm telling you, I reject. And actually, this guy who wrote the letter, that was one of the things he wrote. I renounce you, God. I renounce you, Trinity. And I accept you, Satan. I get goosebumps even talking about it, right? And so it's a willful act where you're saying, even though I'm supposed to be yours, I'm going to hand myself over, right? That's why you've got to be very careful about what you participate in, even when something looks like a game. I'm not saying like walk around and live in fear. That's not what I'm trying to say. But things like a Ouija board, like a Ouija board, the whole premise of the game, a quote unquote game that you can actually buy from a kid's store, right? You can buy a Ouija board at Toys R Us, right? But the premise of Ouija is saying, I'm inviting the spirit into my house to answer my questions, right? So if you're saying, hi, Satan, تعال تفضل, or from one of the previous questions, have some shay, right?
Mm-hmm.
The devil مستني like, يا أهلا وسهلا, ده أنا أشرب كوبايتين كمان, right? So be careful with the premise of anything that you do. Obviously, God is fair, right? And so like if you were involved in something by complete accident, if it's by accident you weren't using your will,
Yeah,
right?
but
A
I
Christian has to
thought
use his will too. Go ahead.
I thought like all of the Ouija board stuff, all of that like was fake. And you're telling me all of this is real, you know?
I wish it was fake. Does the devil come every time you play? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Sometimes it is just some people rolling a ball around. But think about it. The premise of the game is saying, I will summon a spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is for real. One of my friends is a Greek Orthodox priest. And when I was a student, I lived in Thunder Bay for a while. So I used to go to church, and that's how we met each other. And we've maintained our friendship. And he told me about an atheist mom and her daughter, forget Christians. An atheist mom and her daughter called him asking him to exorcise their house. And they're atheist. They tried everything. And so he was like, I didn't know what to do. I'm not an exorcist. I fasted and prayed for 3 days because the Bible said this kind comes up by fasting and prayer. He did everything I could do. I went over. He goes, I started walking up the stairs and I felt like I was being choked. He goes, so I did the prayers of blessing of the house, which in the prayers of blessing of the house, we actually have exorcism prayers in that prayer. And he goes, but their house, The toilet paper rolls would be spinning, the same thing with the paper towels. Faucets would turn on and on, TVs would turn on and off, kettle would start boiling water, it would do all these things on their own. And it was all from when they started playing Ouija together. And so he was like, this was an atheist family. Like, they're not former Christians, they're just always atheist. And so after Abuna did the prayers, it all stopped. And he told them, well, you might want to consider the Jesus thing, because it was the Jesus thing that fixed your house. Right? So, yeah, it is real. Does it mean it's real every single time? Not necessarily. Same thing when you go to see a psychic. Some psychics are just faking, and that's it. That's all they're doing. But some psychics are actually in communion with the devil. Right? So just stay away from it all together, right? Not even as a game. Yeah. I used to think it was just a joke too, Youssef, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well.
خلي بالك.
Well, now there's something else I need to worry about in 2020.
It's been a good year, bro. How do you know if a devil starts to take over you? How do you get rid of the devil? Honestly, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, because most of you are safe. Okay, I don't want you guys to be tripping after this talk of like, oh my gosh, did I get possessed and not know? If you are regular in your sacraments, if you are regular and you're genuine and honest in your struggle, don't worry about it. Worry when you are pursuing evil. Worry when you participate in something very dark and wrong. Worry when you start getting involved in the supernatural. And if you start showing signs, I guarantee you they're going to get noticed. They're going to get noticed. There's a question saying that fasting is torturous, and I don't believe in it. I mean, fasting is voluntary. Okay? So you're not supposed to be forced to fast in terms of like, do this or die. Okay? God actually doesn't require fasting to enter the kingdom of heaven. He never asked us to fast. In terms of the formal fasting, he asked us to fast from wrong. That's all. So in that regard, he's asked us to fast from wrong. But the point of fasting isn't because we think that we're pleasing God by not doing something that's not itself wrong. Right? Food isn't wrong. If food was evil, if lahma was intrinsically evil, we should never eat it. Right? Not just when we're fasting. We should never eat it. But we eat it. Right? So part of the reason for fasting is that we're learning how to have self-control. Right? All of us like to say things like, oh, I would never do that. But we would. I can tell you as a priest now, and this makes me not happy to say, it's not comfortable to say, people have told me that they've committed adultery and cheated on their spouses. People have told me that they've done really horrible things that they never thought they would do. Because the reality is that all of us are weak. All of us, myself included. And that when given the option of something that looks tasty and good, and I'm not just talking about food, I'm talking about anything, we would rather say yes than no, because we're human. Right? Like, sorry, isn't it easier to just go sleep around like everyone else? Like, let's be real. Of course it is. It's way easier to say yes than that. So the idea is that saying no is really, really hard. And so part of the objective of fasting is to practice saying no. And so if you say, well, I have a different way of practicing saying no, I'd say good for you. Then you still believe in fasting. So the issue is not that you don't believe in fasting. The issue is that you don't like fasting from food. And if fasting from food is your main issue, then I would say, then why are you so obsessed with food that you can't say no to it? Maybe you do need fasting from food, right? But if there's a good reason to not fast from food in a particular way, no problem. But get guidance. Just find out a good way to have the effective fasting, right? That's why the church allows priests to loose canons of fastings and say, in your case, don't, right? For example, I've told some diabetics not to worry about fasting before communion if they're about to faint, right? we're not trying to torture people, right? And be like, no, it doesn't matter, faint for Jesus. No, that's not a thing, right? We're not asking you to faint for Jesus. I have a disease, for example, and there are some foods that I'm just not allowed to eat. So my father confession actually has a different rule of fasting for me, right? And for people, for example, with me in confession who are struggling with different things, I might ask them to fast in a different way for different things, right? If you're addicted to video games, for example, we might talk about fasting from video games to learn self-control. And I'm not saying ban video games. I'm saying maybe to get under self-control. I know that I was addicted to cell phone games for a while. I got addicted to Soda Crush a few years back. And I needed to bring it in check because I was hardcore addicted. Because I do have an addictive personality. I know that about myself, right? So I just want us to understand, like, ask what the point of something is before saying you don't believe in it, because you might think you know the point and not. Right? And to recognize what the church is and isn't saying. We're not calling objects bad. When we fast from something, we're not saying that the thing is bad. Right? If something's bad, we just don't do it. We don't fast from it. We just don't do it. We don't fast from things because they are bad. We're fasting for another reason. The other part of fasting is that fasting wasn't supposed to happen the way that we do it today. Today, when we're fasting, everybody eats fried foods. They stock up on carbs. They eat siyami macaron bechamel, siyami shawarma, siyami kofta, Beyond Meat, everything. That's not what fasting is. So if you are annoyed at fasting because you're like, what's the point? I actually agree with you. If that's why you're saying it, I agree with you. Because the way that fasting used to work was that we didn't have fridges, we didn't have microwaves, right? We didn't have these hardcore like stoves that we have today. Actually, what fasting would have looked like when fasting began was paleo with no meat. So you wouldn't be frying stuff. You wouldn't be eating any of these hardcore stuff. You'd be eating fruits, veggies, fresh, raw, organic kind of stuff. And for those of you who have ever done that, you will feel amazing physically. And so part of the idea of fasting was now not just to learn self-control, it was also to say, spend this time on your cooking and on your planning. Stop eating foods that are going to make you feel itis hard, right? Where you're lethargic and you're like, oh, I just want to sleep after that steak. And saying, now use that energy and your time to do something else. And finally, fasting came with a spiritual program. So part of what you might not like about fasting might actually be because you're not used to fasting right. And so it's almost like you went to, like, somebody told you, here's a great diet to lose weight, do keto, and you haven't been doing keto right, so you're seeing no results from keto, and you're saying keto is so stupid, I'm not going to do it. Right? Where it's just like, okay, you're right, it didn't work out for you, but try and find out why it didn't would be a better strategy. So that's that. I hope I'm not boring you guys. What do I do to start my spiritual life? That's a great question too. I think we need to have like a whole series on that, to be honest with you, because that's not a question that can be answered in like 30 seconds. But I think what I really want you guys to know, because I think I don't think I felt this growing up. I think I felt it more as an adult with certain teachers that came into my life. I was told it growing up, but I didn't really understand it. That spiritual life is not about like random tasks, right? It's not about like, here's this list of things that God wants me to do. That's not what it is, right? Spiritual life is about relationship. And to be in a relationship requires two things. It needs two living beings. So in your relationship with God, there's God and there's you. Actually, in Christianity, it's bigger than that. It's that you can't have a relationship with God alone because you have brothers and sisters. So there's also a relationship with your family, right? Which is why God said, love God and your neighbor, and that the two are together. So if you want your relationship to start, you need to start asking the question of, who are you, God? Who are you? And if you start with that question and actually start looking for the answer, your spiritual life is going to start getting better. Because you'll find out what a spirit even is. How many of you even know that a spirit is a real thing? Like most of us talk about it like it's some random voodoo thing. It's like karma, right? It's this really fuzzy, touchy-feely thing. But the spirit is actually a real thing. It's a real aspect of your being. And so it's about health, right? It's about keeping your spirit healthy. And it's about knowing who God is and knowing who you are, right? So for example, if I'm friends with somebody and I say, oh, friend rule, I'm supposed to call you because friends call friends. That's awkward. Even though friends do call friends. We do. Right? And let's say you're mad and you're like, okay, AP, he's my dog, right? And we're gonna text each other daily. And then suddenly AP is not texting daily, and you say friend alarm, bad friend not texting daily. And then you hit up AP and say, what the heck is wrong with you? You stopped texting. I thought we were friends. Are we not friends? What is going on? Why do you hate me? What's going on? You used to text 7 times a day. Now you text 3. If that, some days you text 0. And I'm like, bro, chill. I'm busy. And you say, well, friends are supposed to text. At least text once a day. And then let's say I start texting once a day. And you're like, you know what? You're only texting me because I told you to. Would you text me if I didn't tell you to? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? If you start making it about actions and activities, you're not going to really be in a relationship. Even though communication does matter in the relationship. Yes, we need to text each other. But not because it's a rule, but because we need to be in communication. Right? Just like, for example, if two people are married, let's say one of the spouses, let's make it the mom because we always make doctors boys. Let's say mom's the doctor and dad's not. And mom has been working on call and she's done night shift for 5 nights in a row and she's exhausted. And she comes home and she doesn't want to talk. She wants to eat and go to bed. Can the husband say, مش بتحبني يا ستي? If you loved me, you would ask me, how was your day? And listen to me and tell me what it was like to be stuck with the kids while you were at work. And nobody's listening to me. And he says, and she says, Ya amma haram alik dana halkana and Aiza, right? If we say that this wife doesn't love her husband because she's tired today, that's not true. She's just exhausted. But if she's going on call on purpose because she doesn't want to talk to her husband, there's a problem, right? So I'm trying to get you to think about is look at things as relationship, not as rules. So that when you're praying, you need to start realizing that you're praying not to something, but to someone. Right? And when you start reading the Bible, you stop viewing it as I read the Bible, so I'm good now. God, will you give me an A on my exam? I read the Bible and I fasted. Right? Instead, the Bible is saying, I don't know everything about God. Can somebody tell me about him? What are ways that God spoke in history? I still read the Bible when I read the Bible, asking that question, God, who are you? I still, till this day, I haven't stopped asking that question. Right? Who are you? What does this tell me about you? How do I know you? Right? Why did you deal with Saint Mary this way, but you dealt with Zechariah this way? How come you weren't mad at Moses when he said this, but you were very upset when Saul said this? How come you let Moses get away with this, but you didn't let him get away with this? Why were you upset when this person said this, but you defended this person when he said this? Because God has a personality. right? So I can start saying, how do I know more about God, right? So the starting point of your relationship is recognizing that it's a relationship, it's not an activity. Activities happen in a relationship, they have to happen, but the activities are not themselves the relationship, right? It's a really big difference, and when you start viewing things like that, you'll start seeing a difference in your spiritual life. But what I'd really say, I'm not going to get a lie. I get scared to say this because I used to say this all the time before I was a priest. I get nervous to say this as a priest because I'm worried you guys are thinking I'm trying to like sign you up to confess to me. But this is why you need spiritual guidance, right? I'm not saying it for you to come to me. Go to whoever you want, right? But it's why we need spiritual guidance. I still go to my spiritual guide. I still try and advance in my spiritual life. I'm not like, oh, wow, I'm a priest. I'm somehow magical. No, I'm not. Even in my own spiritual life, I'm always trying to get closer and closer to God, right? I'm trying to improve my relationship with him. I'm trying to go through life with him, right? So I would say the other thing is get a spiritual father, because you do need somebody to help you, to teach you how um, to learn and how to grow and why things are. It's like having your own personal trainer, right? Of being able to say, how come when I go to the gym, I'm not getting jacked? I'm getting on the same treadmill as everybody else, right? And having that person to help you out. That's where I would start. Um, how can we confess now with today's circumstances? And would I be willing to take a person as father confession? So these days, honestly, the bishops have given us carte blanche for internet confessions, like in terms of Zoom or a phone call, any of those things. Um, I am leaving. Um, I am leaving this weekend, actually on Sunday, to go back to California. But when I get back, I'm supposed to be here for 9 months straight. Um, and yes, I'm willing to take on anybody for a confession, because I think it's so important. I'm gonna tell you honestly, most of my personal spiritual life was built more in confession. Is more built in confession and one-on-one, because that's in lessons I learned a lot, like on general levels, but it was in confession when I got to sit with my spiritual father and ask questions. And maybe when I come back, I'll give you guys a talk about confession, because I think sometimes we don't know how to do it, so we don't benefit as much, right? But I would come to my father confession. I wasn't afraid to talk to him about anything, right? I'd be like, yeah, I hate my parents' guts, right? Like I know I'm not supposed to, but actually I hate them, right? Or like, yeah, I don't feel badly for this person. I'm actually really happy that they're suffering. I was like, haha, in your face serves you right, right? Where I could actually have these conversations and have someone help me learn how to not wish evil. Um, who is the father of confession for the Pope? It's actually, to my knowledge, I think it's Bekhit, and El Bahira, because that was his father of confession before. Pope Shenouda, just so you know, for a long time confessed to a normal priest, not to even a bishop, to Mikhail Ibrahim, who was a great father confession to many famous people. Um, and so everybody confesses. Um, do we have to confess to an abuna, or can we confess to God? Unfortunately, and fortunately, it has to be to abuna. I say unfortunately because I know it's hard. Even for me, I still get nervous. Like I do it too. Um, but God is the one who established it, right? It's not because we want to. Um, That's why he told the disciples, whosoever sins you remit, they're remitted, whosoever sins you retain, they're retained. Actually, that's why when we prayed the absolution, if you pay attention to what we pray, I like to pray the absolution out loud for people. I don't do it quietly. Um, and the absolution, what we're saying when we pray the absolution is, God, I don't have the authority to forgive sins. Only you do. I'm only doing this. I'm paraphrasing in modern English. I'm only doing this because you told us to. You told the apostles, and the apostles made priests, and I'm a priest. So this person who's coming to you confessing their sins, Lord, you forgive them, you absolve them, you heal them, not me. You do this. And then why a priest? Because what does the priest then do with your confession? Just like in the Old Testament, it was done over the lamb. Today it's also over the lamb, but now it's the lamb who's Jesus Christ himself. The priest takes your sins and puts them on the Lamb of God himself and says, Lord, you carry the sins of the world, not me. and puts it on. That's actually why there's a tradition that the deacon's tunia has a cross only on the front, is how it's supposed to be. But the priest has it on the front and the back. The deacon comes carrying his own sins, but the priest comes in bearing his sins and that of the people when he puts them on the lamb. So there's some deep symbolism there. So it does need to be a priest. I know that's not always comfortable, even for me, but we're only doing it because Jesus said so, not because we want to. Honestly, if you ask any of us, we'd all rather not hear it, right? Like, it's not like we're excited to hear anything wrong that you did, as much as we're not excited to say our wrongs to other people half the time. But when you have a good father of confession who's able to guide you, you might come to even like it, right? You might still be nervous, but you might actually come to enjoy it and feel relief. I know that as much as I dread it, I psychologically feel a lot of relief when I get this stuff off of my chest. Like, I feel a big relief after, right? In the same way, for example, I'll tell you something. I did something really horrible in second year pharmacy school. I'm still so ashamed, even though I confessed it. One of my closest friends was logged into my computer. He logged into his Gmail account on my computer. And he saved his credentials when he went in. I still feel so like scum of the earth for this. I hope you guys don't hate my guts after this. And when I went to log into Gmail, his Gmail was already open. And I wish I could say that I just logged out. I didn't. And I went through some of his very personal emails about things that I knew I had a suspicion were going on. He was dating someone. And he had the blessings of Father Confession, but he was trying to keep it like undercover. I read them. And I want to tell you that I couldn't sleep. I felt so dirty. Like, I felt so scummy that I betrayed my friend like that. And so I was dying to get it out. And I was also afraid that if I told my friend, that he'd cut me off forever. Because in my mind, that's what I would do as well. I actually only got relief when I was able to say it out loud to someone. Like, when I was just saying, I'm that guy, I did that, right? And to get counsel on whether to say or not to say. But it was actually scary for me. I know it might sound petty to you, but it was a really big deal to me. The other thing that I want to tell you about is, if a priest judges you, if the priest has the boldness to judge you for any sin that you do, rest assured that your lawyer is God. Your prosecutor is God. And I can tell you from personal experience, the priest will get wrecked. So if a priest has the courage and the boldness to judge you, that guy is in for it. I can tell you that from now. And if he breaks the seal of confession, he's in for it. And if you know that the priest has broken the seal of confession, you go straight to your bishop, because it means big time problems for Abuna if he does that. So if your fear is about judgment or confidentiality, you're on the right team. Even the law protects Abuna from having to tell what you've said in the court of law, right? If you were to confess murder, I'm allowed to not testify in court. There's a follow-up to the fasting question, that if they say no, the church will not allow them to have communion. That's what I'm saying. Talk to your father of confession, because the priest is allowed to absolve you from that canon. So if the priest absolves you from it, yes, you can still have communion. You'll be all right. You won't be kicked out of communion for that. Who does Abuna confess to? We confess to other priests. There's some questions about liturgy and prayer. I think that maybe I'll have a special talk about prayer. Listen, like, there might be some talks to have scattered throughout. Like I said, when I come back from California, God willing, I'm going to be coming more often to this group. because I will be freer on Fridays. And that way we can even have a regular Q&A, and then maybe just have like once a month where there's a joint topic. And it would be cool if we joined the churches up for that, if some of those events, so that we can all benefit together. Will I do talks to you guys from the monastery? I hope so, but I need to find out first from my bishop when I go back if he's assigning me any service. If he's assigning me service while I'm home at the monastery, then I won't be able to. If he's not, then I will. I will be doing stuff with you guys from Cali, no problem, from the monastery. I would love to. Same thing with the Bible study, because the Bible study that I do every other Tuesday is for all ages, by the way. That's not for any particular age group. That's for everybody. And even if I'm serving in California and not doing meetings specifically with the van churches while I'm there, there's a good chance I'll end up doing some kind of talk or service online. And if so, I'll make sure to share the link with it. I love you too, man. But when I have, I'm supposed to have, like, I've been fighting with the guys in Cali who are working on moving my website over. I'm gonna have a public schedule, public links, everything's there so that anybody can find whatever I'm doing wherever easily and do it. The Bible study is every other Tuesday. I've been doing it at St. Mary's. And the link I'll share with all of the servants here. If those of you who are serving, if you can just make sure that the links get out to everybody of all churches all the time would be good. And like I said, it'll be, God willing, also on the website when it's up. And I'll probably have a sign up newsletter or text thing so that you can just get updates when they're there with the public. Here's another. If you join the St. Paul's Brotherhood, are you a monk or a priest? What's your position? Honestly, that schizophrenia is a big problem for us in the Brotherhood. What are we exactly? And it causes a whole lot of issues. Formally speaking, in terms of the church structure, we haven't been recognized yet as a monastery, although they might do that. Having said that, we took the monastic vow, so we're treated as a monastery. So, like, on the dotted line, I'm a celibate priest belonging to a monastery that's not recognized. And what they want is for it to be a formal thing. To me, it doesn't make a big difference in terms of we took the monastic vows. So whether I'm called a monk or not called a monk doesn't matter to me personally. In that, monasticism to me should mean a monk in a cell, because that's the image of monasticism that we received and that I grew up with. And so I prefer to say that I live monastically as an adjective. And that my periods in my own cell, that's where I get to serve as a genuine monk. When I go home for my retreats and I'm in my cell. And that when I'm out serving, I'm functioning as a priest in the church of God. Because in the early church, that's how it was. In the early church, sometimes a monk left his monastery to serve. That did happen. But he wasn't viewed as a monk while he was out serving. It was understood that he's a monk, but he wasn't treated as a monk. He was treated as a priest who's not married. But then when he would go back to his monastery, that's why if you see pictures, for example, of bishops and serving monks from the 60s and the 70s, you'll see them wearing a amma, not a kulunsowa, right? Because it's understood that when they left the monastery that they were serving. And when they came back to the monastery, they didn't. So for example, if I were to say, oh, I'm a monk, I'm not going to watch the news while I'm serving, I might not be doing you guys a favor, right? Because I'll have no idea what's going on in your world. I'm not saying every monk, every servant has to read the news, but I just mean it's that. So I'm some hybrid of in between. Pray for me to figure myself out. It's hard to feel God's presence in my life. What do I do to feel him? Am I still muted? Somebody said I'm muted. Can you guys hear me again?
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. How do you feel God's presence in your life? This has a lot to do with spiritual life. About when we stop seeing things as activities. Maybe one of the talks I'll have is I want to talk to you about what it means to be with the Lord. right? When I start treating God like he really exists, instead of treating God like he's some fictitious character or my imaginary friend, and when I start living in a healthy way, can tell you that the only thing that's going to give you comfort more than anything else is the knowledge of his presence. And it will be knowledge at that time. It won't be an idea. It'll be real. Right? And throughout your life, many of your servants talk to them. I'm sure that they've had their own experiences with God. I'm sure you've had some experiences with God, right? You'll start to know what it's like to walk with him. And so we'll have a talk about that. I don't want to give it just like lip service. Is it hard? It is hard. And it's not hard because the actions are hard. It's hard because we're used to not living like that, right? It's like when you're used to eating junk food and suddenly trying to eat healthy. It's hard. It's like finding out that you're eating too much and like, man, this is hard to eat this little at first, right? It's hard to spend this much money on health food because it was cheaper to get junk food. So those parts of it are hard at first. But once you start seeing the benefits of health, it becomes not so hard. It actually even becomes enjoyable, right? And then you know why you're doing it. So that's again why I keep emphasizing you need to have a spiritual guide, right? To help navigate you for how to get on that track and how to get healthy and how to feel those things yourself. How did I join the St. Paul's Brotherhood? Well, that's a long story. I used to make fun of it. I actually wanted to be a monk in a traditional monastery. I wanted to be a monk in this monastery in my background, St. Antony's in the Red Sea, where that's where I fell in love with God. And the monks played a big role in raising me. So I've been going every year since 2000 or 2001, and I'd spend months at a time there. And actually, part of my 3 months that I'm gone, one of the months is going to be at the monastery, because that's where I go every year for my retreat. So when I went to join the monastery, for various reasons, I ended up joining the monastery in California. And I was not sure if California was the right place for me to be a monk at. So I was going to leave it to go to Egypt. Ambassador, my bishop, he's the abbot of my monastery and of my diocese, told me to try out the brotherhood first and said, well, you seem to have a calling as well for service. And in the brotherhood, you get to live the best of both worlds. You get to be a monk, but you also serve. So he encouraged me to try it and see whether or not I feel comfortable, and that if I didn't, I'd be allowed to join the monastery. And so long story short, I asked God, because God had clearly told me to pursue this life. I asked him to give me the same communication, whether I should go to the brotherhood, and he did. And that's how I joined the brotherhood. And I don't regret it, to be honest with you. Like, thank God, he knows what's best for all of us. And he knows what is the right expression of love for all of us. So for me, I wanted to love him in a cell, but at the same time, I was saying, God, what do you want? Because you know me best. You know what the best place is for me and for you. And so he said, for the time being here, he could tell me to do something else later, but for now, this is where he wants me. Do I take confessions? I sure do. I am going to end with this question, because the other ones are more heavy loaded, and will open a whole can of worms, and they're good questions, but I just want to deal with things in their spot. Recommend interesting books to read. So I'm going to be gone for 3 months. I'm going to recommend 3 books if you guys are down. And I don't want you to roll your eyes when I tell you them, because they might sound boring, but they're not. They're not hard. First one, actually, let me put it, because it's a particular one, is Saint Athanasius. If the servants can actually buy it for the youth, that would be clutch. Is
Christmas
Saint
Day.
Athanasius by F.A. Forbes. Now, this book is written as a story. It's written as fiction. Okay, so it's not written as born in the year this, he did this, he did that. It's written as fiction and it's short. And I'm telling you that some of my homies from Ontario that never, ever read a book were able to read this book because they ended up loving it. Okay, and it's not long. Another book is Crazy John. I don't remember the author, but Crazy John, Gerges Youssef in Ottawa did an audio recording of it. And you can find it on SoundCloud. Okay, so month 1, St. Athanasius. Month 2, Crazy John. And month 3, this is my bias. So hold on, this will be month 2, Life of Antony, because month 2 will be the month where his feast is. So at the end of the month, you'll hopefully have finished reading the life, so that on the feast of St. Antony, you do it. Life of St. Antony is a little bit, there's some more modern translations. So I recommend you get a more modern translation of it, because the older ones might feel a little hard. But I want you, when you read the life of Antony, to think about that St. Antony was a teenager when he started doing what he did. He wasn't like in his 50s. He was between the age of 18 and 20. St. Antony was in his mid-20s when he physically fought the devil, right? He's a beast. He's a G. So actually, that's a great order, because Athanasius and Antony were friends. So we read St. Athanasius, and he's the one. So after you finish reading his story, you'll read the book that he wrote, because he is the one who wrote the life of St. Antony, right? And then Crazy John for the third one. Those are all light reads, and really, really good reads. And then depending on how things go, if my bishop blesses it, 2 of the months, the month that I'm not in the monastery, I'm in the monastery, I shut down completely in Egypt. But the 2 months that I'm not in the Brotherhood, maybe we can online and talk about the book and get into things that you like, thought you were cool. And I want you, like, St. Athanasius is actually hilarious. Like, he's actually a straight up G. This guy gets taken to trial multiple times, being accused of killing people, of cutting off people's arms. He's epic. And so if at the end of the month you haven't been able to get through the book, there's a recording of me summarizing his life, but I really want you to get to the book and to read it. And that's it. Thank you guys so much. There's a whole bunch of questions left. Like, these are really good questions. I think maybe what we can do for the next time that we have it is categorize the questions into different kinds. And that way I can choose from each of the lists. Like, I'll go through all of them, but like to scatter them up. So I'm sorry if you have some questions I didn't get to. We're at 104 at this time. And I will, when I come back, God willing, all of you will know how to contact me. I'll have a schedule, like everything will be organized at that point. Things got messed up because of COVID. I was also only originally going to be here for 2 months. So my planning was based around being here for 2 months, not 3. So then it got kind of weird. I should have been more accessible by now. Hopefully when we get back, this COVID stuff is less restrictive. And I'll have regular confession times, regular rotation times, regular meeting times. And I'll be at your service, because part of the reason of me being a general priest for you guys is that I'm not doing certain things so that when you want to confess, you can, so that when you want to talk, you can, right? Like, we really care that I'm available for you guys to be able to do all of that. And I also really want to say before I fly off, like, you guys are awesome, like, for real. Like, you guys have been so warm and loving. And I really, really, really appreciate it. You guys have made Vancouver feel like home. So I am eager to be back in 3 months. Just make sure you pray for me and then you keep it real. Let's end with prayer and then we'll bezounce. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. We ask you, Lord, to hear us the intercessions and prayers of Holy Mother, Theotokos, Saint Mary, the great Saint Antony, Saint Pope Carlos, when we pray, saying, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Go in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all. Peace out, homies.